What makes a period drama truly unforgettable? Is it the costumes, the settings, or the sense that you're living inside history itself? Only a handful of films manage to balance gripping storytelling with accuracy, so sharp it feels like time travel. These aren't just dramas, they're living history on screen, and one of them may change how you see the past forever. Peterloo, 2018, an overlooked tragedy brought to life with documentary precision. Mike Leigh's Peterloo doesn't open with fanfare. It begins in mudblood and silence, throwing us straight into the aftermath of the Battle of Waterloo before shifting to Manchester in the early 19th century. Every frame feels researched to the bone. From the dialect of working-class speakers to the speeches echoing in assembly halls, Leigh insists on authenticity. He even hired historians to comb over details like banners, meeting minutes, and the specific uniforms of the yeomanry. The massacre of 1819, when cavalry charged into a peaceful protest demanding parliamentary reform, has long been underrepresented in film. Leigh changes that, refusing melodrama and instead delivering a painstakingly accurate portrayal. You'll notice the pacing is deliberate, almost stubbornly so. But that's the point. It mirrors the grind of political mobilization at the time. And when the violence comes, it feels shockingly uncinematic, closer to a newsreel than a war epic. What stands out most is the film's refusal to Hollywoodize its history. There are no invented heroes, no contrived love stories, just ordinary people trying and failing to be heard. The result is devastating and unforgettable. If you want your history raw, Peterloo is as real as it gets. The Dam Busters, 1955, a war film that dares to be technical, not just dramatic. When it comes to World War II, drama's most films lean on spectacle. The Dam Busters took another route. It's famously meticulous, almost an engineering lecture in places, but that's exactly what gives it staying power. Based on the true story of Operation Chastise, the film recreates Barnes-Wallis's development of the bouncing bomb and the RAF's daring mission to breach Germany's dams. Every detail, from the tension of test flights to the exacting mathematics of bomb trajectory, is presented with reverence for fact. Veterans who saw the film at its release often remarked on how closely it resembled their own experiences. Of course, some parts are streamlined for pacing, but even the dialogue carries the clipped, understated tone of wartime communication. The aerial sequences achieved without modern CGI are particularly striking. Miniatures, carefully rigged explosions, and full-size Lancasters give the sense you're witnessing the raid in real time. While later films often inject unnecessary dramatics, the Dam Busters trust the sheer audacity of the mission to grip the viewer. It's more than just a film, it's practically a piece of historical documentation with a pulse. That's why decades later, historians and film buffs still point to it as one of the most accurate war dramas Britain has ever produced. A Bridge Too Far, 1977. When Hollywood-sized scale meets British precision. At first glance, A Bridge Too Far looks like a blockbuster with too many stars to take seriously. Sean Connery, Michael Caine, Anthony Hopkins, and more. But behind the cast list is an obsessive attention to detail. The film dramatizes Operation Market Garden, the ambitious Allied attempt to secure bridges across the Netherlands in 1944. Unlike many war epics, the production leaned heavily on military advisors, including veterans who'd been there. Filming took place on authentic locations down to Arnhem itself, giving the movie a grit that can't be faked. Director Richard Attenborough insisted on accuracy, even if it meant slowing the pace or juggling multiple perspectives. The film doesn't shy away from the operation's failure either. Instead of triumphalist victory, it portrays confusion, logistical blunders, and the grim consequences of overconfidence. Scenes of paratroopers landing in broad daylight exposed to enemy fire carry an almost documentary-like weight because they're not exaggerated, they happen that way. Yes, the running time is hefty, and yes, juggling so many characters can be overwhelming, but that sprawling structure is the point. Market Garden was sprawling, chaotic, and in the end, doomed. A Bridge Too Far may feel exhausting, but it's historically exhausting for a reason. It's one of the rare war films that dares to show a defeat with unflinching honesty. Dunkirk, 2017, a modern classic that trades dialogue for lived experience. Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk doesn't unfold like a traditional war movie. Dialogue is sparse backstory, non-existent, and characters often remain unnamed. Instead, Nolan thrusts you into the chaos of May 1940, when hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers were trapped on the beaches, waiting for rescue. What makes it historically accurate isn't just the recreation of the evacuation, but the sensory detail. Real ships were used, authentic Spitfires flew in the skies, and extras were trained to move like actual soldiers of the period. Even the soundscape, the rattling engines, the screaming dive bombers, was engineered to mimic first-hand accounts. Some historians nitpick about timelines since Nolan plays with 3 overlapping story structures. But the emotional truth is razor-sharp. The exhaustion, the terror, and the unlikely miracle of civilian boats crossing the channel are all grounded in the record. In fact, Nolan consulted surviving veterans, making sure he didn't romanticize their ordeal. Instead of swelling speeches or heroic cliches, the film relies on stark imagery: bodies waiting in silence, a stretcher carried across planks, a pilot gliding to a quiet crash landing. By stripping away Hollywood gloss, Dunkirk becomes one of the most immersive historical recreations of its kind. You don't just watch history, you feel it. The King's Speech, 2010, a royal story that's strangely human and startlingly accurate. On paper, a film about a king learning to speak properly doesn't sound thrilling. Yet, The King's Speech became a worldwide phenomenon precisely because it turned history into something intimate. Colin Firth's portrayal of King George VI's struggle with a stammer is more than just an acting triumph, it's a careful reflection of real events. The filmmakers worked with speech therapists to ensure the techniques shown were true to the period. The character of Lionel Logue. George's Australian therapist was drawn directly from historical records, including Logue's own notes. The film even nails the emotional stakes. George wasn't just learning to speak clearly, he was preparing to lead a nation standing on the brink of war. Costume and setting add another layer of accuracy. The drab therapy rooms, the quiet tension of royal family dynamics, the looming weight of public expectation all reflect the lived reality of Britain in the 1930s. And the climactic broadcast speech during the early days of World War II is reconstructed almost word for word. Critics sometimes argue that the film simplifies the political backdrop, but its focus was never on politics. Its power lies in capturing a very human battle, one fought not with armies, but with determination and vulnerability. That's why, even years later, it remains one of the most historically grounded and emotionally resonant period dramas Britain has produced. Mr. Turner, 2014, a portrait of genius that smells of linseed oil and sea salt. Mike Leigh returns to the canvas of history with Mr. Turner, and what he delivers isn't a neat biopic, but a sprawling, textured immersion into the life of painter J.M.W. Turner. Timothy Spall's performance is famously raw, right down to the grunts and growls Turner used in daily speech. But what elevates this film to historical accuracy gold is the obsessive detail poured into every frame. Leigh worked with art historians, studied Turner's actual notebooks, and recreated the painter's working methods down to the exact brushes and pigments. Scenes of Turner sketching storms at sea or layering oils in his studio aren't romanticized. They're practical, messy, and true to how the man really worked. Even Turner's eccentricity, often reduced to caricature, is presented with grounded authenticity. The settings, too, ring with truth. From fog-drenched London streets to sun-drenched seaside landscapes, the cinematography was inspired by Turner's own palette. You're not just watching a man paint, you're watching the world through his eye. Critics praised its refusal to sand down Turner's difficult personality. He's brilliant, flawed, sometimes unpleasant, and always driven. That balance between artistry and honesty makes Mr. Turner one of the most realistic period portraits on film. It doesn't mythologize the painter, it lets you step into his world, grime and all. Topsy-Turvy, 1999. When accuracy meets operatic flair, most period dramas deal with kings, queens, or soldiers. Topsy-Turvy dares to dive into the world of theater in Victorian London, focusing on Gilbert and Sullivan as they struggled to launch the Mikado. And here's the surprise. It might be one of the most painstakingly accurate portrayals of creative process you'll ever see. Director Mike Leigh spent years researching not only Gilbert and Sullivan, but also the social customs, theatrical practices, and even backstage gossip of the time. Costumes are replicas of the actual designs. Rehearsal methods shown in the film match accounts from surviving performers. Even the financial tensions of the Savoy Theatre are presented with documentary-like precision. The film doesn't romanticize the era. Actors are shown battling health issues, performers complain about corsets and wigs, and creative clashes simmer beneath polite manners. But through the authenticity shines a sense of joy, its history not as a dusty textbook, but as living, breathing art. What makes Topsy-Turvy stand out is how it captures the grind behind the glamour. Yes, the music soars, but the film insists on showing the sweat, the rehearsal fatigue, and the fragile egos that shaped Victorian theater. That's what makes it one of the most underrated, yet historically faithful period dramas on the list. The Dig, 2021. Archaeology with mud on its boots. Set in the tense months before World War II, The Dig dramatizes the Sutton Hoo excavation, when a wealthy landowner allowed archaeologists to uncover an Anglo-Saxon ship burial on her property. What could have been a dry museum piece becomes a surprisingly faithful snapshot of history in motion. The production team consulted real excavation notes, recreated the tools of the period, and shot scenes in Suffolk landscapes strikingly similar to the actual site. Ralph Fiennes, playing self-taught archaeologist Basil Brown, even worked with professional diggers to master the physical techniques, spade in hand, backbent mud, clinging to boots. The film does take liberties, most notably aging down archaeologist Peggy Piggott and adding a fictionalized romance subplot. But at its heart, the discovery itself is presented with remarkable care. The sheer scale of the buried ship, the painstaking brushwork uncovering delicate artifacts, and the political undercurrent of a nation bracing for war all resonate with truth. The Dig also captures something rarer, the quiet heroism of people preserving culture when destruction loomed on the horizon. It's about history being unearthed, while history was about to be rewritten by war. That layered accuracy gives the film more weight than most glossy dramas. The Madness of King George, 1994. When the crown cracked, history got real. Nicholas Heitner's The Madness of King George isn't content with royal spectacle, it digs into the frail humanity of monarchy. The story centers on King George III's illness in 1788 and the regency crisis it provoked. What could have been a lurid tale of a monarch's decline becomes instead a carefully researched study of medical practice, political maneuvering, and personal resilience. The filmmakers drew directly from historical accounts of George's erratic behavior, his treatments, and the documented interventions of Dr. Willis. Costumes and palace settings replicate Georgian style with obsessive detail, but it's the medical accuracy that jolts viewers. Treatments shown, ranging from restraints to herbal tonics, reflect exactly how 18th century medicine dealt with psychological and neurological conditions. The film also captures the political implications. Parliament's scramble over regency rival factions, vying for influence, and the delicate balance between personal tragedy and national stability. Far from a sanitized royal tale, it exposes the uncomfortable reality that Britain's fate hinged on the mental health of one man. What makes The Madness of King George shine is its ability to remain both accurate and moving. Nigel Hawthorne's performance shows a king who is at once ridiculous, pitiable, and dignified. History isn't simplified here, it's dramatized with nuance and truth. Suffragette, 2015. History written not in ink, but in grit. Period dramas about political struggle often stumble into cliches, but Suffragette stays rooted in historical fact while still delivering emotional punch. Set in 1912, it follows working-class women who risk everything to demand the right to vote. Unlike many films that focus only on leaders, this one shines a light on the foot soldiers of the movement. The production consulted feminist historians and leaned heavily on original documents from police reports to personal letters. The street protests, hunger strikes, and brutal force-feeding scenes are staged with fidelity to recorded accounts. Even the depiction of secret meetings in laundries and back alleys reflects how activists truly organized. Carey Mulligan's character, Maud Watts, is fictional, but she's a composite drawn from dozens of real women whose stories often went untold. This creative choice doesn't dilute accuracy, it amplifies it, giving voice to those silenced by history. The film doesn't shy from the harshness of the struggle. Prison scenes are not exaggerated. They're based on documented tactics used against protesters. The inclusion of Emily Davison's tragic act at the Derby, staged with period footage, seamlessly blended roots, the drama firmly, in fact. By grounding its narrative in painstaking research and refusing to glamorize suffering, Suffragette earns its spot here. It's not just a history lesson. It's a visceral reminder of battles fought on the streets of Britain less than a century ago. 1917, 2019, a war story told in one breathless take. Sam Mendes' 1917 is often remembered for its dazzling one-shot illusion, but behind the cinematic trick lies a film rooted deeply in authenticity. The story is inspired by accounts from Mendes' grandfather, who served during the First World War, and every trench uniform and ration tin was crafted with obsessive attention to detail. Historians advised on the set design to ensure the trenches reflected actual layouts, not Hollywood fantasies. Mud caked on boots, rats scurrying along walls, and soldiers suffering from trench foot were not dramatic flourishes, but lived realities of 1917. Even the landscape, the barren no-man's land riddled with craters, was modeled after photographs of the Western Front. What sets 1917 apart is its focus on the mundane and the personal. Instead of generals and command tents, we follow two ordinary soldiers tasked with delivering a message. That choice itself reflects historical truth. The war was endured day by day by nameless millions whose struggles rarely make it to screen. The tension comes not from explosions, but from survival itself, crossing a collapsing bridge, dodging a sniper, or crawling through mud while the world collapses around you. Even when the plot invents a fictional mission, the surrounding detail is so grounded that the illusion of history feels seamless. 1917 is proof that accuracy doesn't mean static. It means recreating the lived experience of the past until you feel the damp in your bones and the exhaustion in your chest. Chariots of Fire, 1981, running on truth with a few narrative shortcuts. Chariots of Fire is one of those rare films where even the inaccuracies feel strangely honest. Centered on two British runners, Eric Liddell, a devout Scotsman, and Harold Abrahams, the son of an immigrant, the film dramatizes their journey to the 1924 Paris Olympics. Much of the history is correct. Liddell's principled refusal to compete on a Sunday, Abraham's battle against prejudice, and their ultimate triumphs are all grounded in the record. Costumes, athletics, training methods, and even the way the races are shot reflect the sport as it was in the early 20th century. The filmmakers studied newsreels of the Olympics to make sure race-pacing starting stances and even stadium layouts felt authentic. But here's where it gets interesting. The timeline condenses certain events, and some supporting characters are composites rather than direct portraits. Abraham's coach, Sam Musabini, is accurately portrayed, but other figures blur fact and invention. Yet despite those tweaks, the emotional accuracy is what grabs you. You feel the pressure of class, divides the sting of prejudice, and the stubborn pride of athletes who ran not just for glory, but for something deeper. The film's iconic. Slow-motion beach run might never have happened in real life, but it captures a kind of truth, the grace, the grit, and the enduring power of human determination. That's why, despite its minor liberties, Chariots of Fire remains a gold standard of British historical drama. The Queen, 2006. When recent history becomes gripping drama, how do you dramatize events most viewers actually remember? That was the challenge facing Stephen Frears' The Queen, which takes us into the days immediately after the death of Princess Diana in 1997. The risk was high. People knew the headlines had seen the news footage, but the film still managed to feel authentic and fresh. The accuracy lies in the careful recreation of both public and private responses. Helen Mirren's performance as Queen Elizabeth II isn't an impression, it's a study shaped by actual accounts of her tone, body language, and private demeanor. Scripts drew heavily from documented timelines, the royal family's retreat to Balmoral Prime Minister Tony Blair's speeches, and the eventual decision to address the nation. While the private conversations are inevitably imagined, they're grounded in well-documented tensions. The Queen's resistance to public mourning, the clash with Blair over public perception, and the eventual televised speech are all rooted in fact. Even details like the royal cars, the Balmoral interiors, and the late 90s press frenzy were meticulously reconstructed. What stands out is the film's refusal to villainize or sanctify anyone. Instead, it shows institutions under pressure trying to navigate an unprecedented crisis. For audiences, it was a reminder that history isn't always centuries old. It can be events we lived through, reshaped into stories we continue to debate. Zulu, 1964. A battle remembered with both respect and revision. Zulu dramatizes the defense of Rorke's Drift in 1879 when a small garrison of British soldiers held off a vastly larger Zulu force. On screen, it looks like an impossible stand, and in many ways it was. The film's core event, the outnumbered defenders surviving against the odds, is historically accurate, but the details invite more nuance. What Zulu gets right is the discipline of the British soldiers, the layout of the mission station, and the ferocity of the Zulu assault. Military advisors ensured that uniforms, weapons, and tactics were represented faithfully. The stirring battle sequences with lines of men firing volleys in unison match historical accounts of 19th century warfare. Yet there are liberties. The regiment's identity is altered, and some of the soldier characters are composites rather than direct portraits. Seasonal details are also off. It was winter during the real battle, not the sweltering heat shown in the film. Still, for a production made in the early 60s, the film's dedication to capturing the spirit of the event is impressive. What keeps Zulu relevant is its balance. It avoids simple triumphalism, showing both the bravery of the defenders and the valor of the Zulu fighters. The accuracy isn't perfect, but the respect for history shines through. For many viewers, it remains their first cinematic introduction to a dramatic and complicated chapter of colonial history. The Favorite, 2018, a royal triangle told with wit and a wink. Yorgos Lanthimos. The Favorite is not the most obvious candidate for historical accuracy. It's eccentric biting and filled with stylized flourishes. But beneath the odd humor lies a core of truth. The film portrays Queen Anne in the early 18th century and her tangled relationships with Sarah Churchill and Abigail Masham. Historians agree that Anne's reign was marked by intense political infighting, shifting alliances, and personal dependency on close female companions. The film exaggerates the rivalry for dramatic effect, but the bones of the story are real. The political backdrop, the War of the Spanish Succession, parliamentary battles, and Sarah Churchill's influence is handled with surprising precision. Costume design, while slightly stylized, remains grounded in period research, from elaborate wigs to corseted gowns. Even the makeup pale skin, darkened eyes reflects actual fashion trends of the time. The film also nails the mood of Anne's court, decadent, unstable, and laced with both power and pettiness. Yes, it's playful sometimes, even surreal, but accuracy doesn't always mean dry. What The Favorite captures is the emotional truth of power struggles inside the palace walls. It shows history not just as fact, but as experienced petty arguments, whispered betrayals, and fragile egos shaping the fate of a nation. That blend of wit and research makes it a fitting close to this list. So, which of these dramas pulled you deepest into the past? Was it the mud-caked trenches of 1917, the courtly intrigue of The Favorite, or the suffocating silence of Dunkirk? Accuracy doesn't mean boredom, it means immersion. These films remind us that history isn't just in books. It lives on screen when done right. Drop your favorite in the comments, hit subscribe, and tell us what other period dramas deserve a spot in the Hall of Accuracy.